"Step away from the rod, sir." That's what the officer said, hand on his holster like my brother was some outlaw poacher, not a middle-aged guy in cargo shorts pulling bluegill out of my backyard lake. The sirens had shattered the evening calm, bouncing off the water, sending ducks flapping into the sky. Porch lights blinked on one by one. Blinds cracked open, and suddenly the entire cul-de-sac was tuned in to the showdown of the year. My brother froze, line still dancing in the water while I stood on the dock, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the crickets. And then, of course, she appeared. Linda Meadows, clipboard in hand. Smirk plastered across her face like she'd just won HOA Jeopardy. If you've never met an HOA president who treats bylaws like commandments from on high, count yourself lucky. Linda wasn't just president. She was queen of our manicured little kingdom. She'd spent years policing the color of mulch, measuring grass height with a ruler, and sending nastygrams about recycling bins left out for an extra hour. And now, apparently, fishing was the crime of the century. "Officers, he is trespassing on common property," she declared, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Lake Serenity belongs to the HOA. No one, not even homeowners, has fishing privileges unless granted by the board." My brother looked at her like she'd just claimed to own the moon. "I'm literally standing on my sister's dock," he said. "She invited me. We're not talking about trespassing. We're talking about fish." Linda wasn't listening. She had the rapt audience of twitching blinds and gawking neighbors, and that was all she needed. She flicked through her clipboard like it was holy scripture, jabbing at a highlighted line. Article 12, Section 4. The lake is a common area and may not be exploited by individual members. Do you hear that, officers? Exploited. That's what he's doing. "I swear," she said, "exploited," as if my brother were running a black market caviar ring. The cops, to their credit, looked embarrassed. One muttered something about civil disputes and not really our jurisdiction. But Linda kept pressing, waving her papers like a lawyer in a courtroom drama. She wanted handcuffs. She wanted a mugshot. She wanted a victory she could brag about at the next HOA meeting. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about fishing. This was about power. Let me rewind. 2 weeks before this circus, I'd received one of Linda's infamous letters. A beige envelope tucked under my doormat, my name printed in aggressive Times New Roman. It read, "Reminder, fishing from private docks is prohibited. Violators will be fined $100 per incident." She cited bylaws, as always, but I'd lived here for 5 years. No one had ever mentioned this rule before. I'd seen kids catching minnows, retirees with folding chairs, even Linda's own husband casting a line once or twice. But now, suddenly, fishing was a crime. I'd laughed it off. My brother, visiting for the weekend, thought it was ridiculous too. So, naturally, he grabbed his old rod, strolled to the dock, and dropped a line in. We thought we were being rebellious. Turns out, we were lighting the fuse on a suburban war. "Ma'am," one officer said carefully, "we don't see any criminal activity here." Linda's nostrils flared like she'd smelled a dead fish. "You are sworn to uphold the law." "This isn't law, ma'am. It's a homeowners association rule." The crowd behind the blinds rippled with suppressed laughter. A neighbor across the water coughed loudly, clearly stifling a chuckle. I almost smiled. Almost, but then I saw Linda's eyes flick toward me. Cold, calculating, like a chess player who'd just spotted a longer game. She lowered her voice, but I was close enough to hear. "If the police won't enforce it, the board will. You and your guest will regret this." The officers exchanged glances, muttered something about paperwork, and retreated, their sirens silenced, their cars rolling back down the street. But the damage was done. The neighborhood had witnessed the spectacle, and Linda had written the opening act of her drama. Homeowner defies rule, HOA president pounces, chaos ensues. When my brother reeled in his line, pulling up a tiny sunfish, Linda gasped like he'd reeled up contraband. "That will be documented," she hissed, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "You'll be fined. And if fines aren't paid, well, there are consequences. I wanted to shout back, but something in her smile stopped me. It wasn't glee. It wasn't smugness. It was certainty. Linda Meadows didn't start fights she wasn't sure she'd win. Later that night, after the blinds had snapped shut and the street was quiet again, my brother and I sat on the porch nursing beers. The air smelled like cut grass and lake water, but there was a bitterness too, something sour in the neighborhood breeze. "You weren't kidding about her," he said. "She's out of her mind." "She's worse than out of her mind," I muttered. "She's dangerous." He leaned back, exhaling smoke into the dark. "So, what happens now?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. But as I stared at the lake, reflecting the faint orange glow of street lamps, I caught a glimpse of Linda's silhouette in her upstairs window, still clutching that clipboard, watching, waiting, plotting. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't over. The fishing rod had just been the bait. The real hook was still waiting. "Zero tolerance," Linda's gavel cracked against the folding table, echoing through the clubhouse like a gunshot. "Anyone who disrespects the rules of this community will face consequences, homeowners included." The room froze. Plastic chairs squeaked as neighbors shifted uncomfortably, their paper name tags rustling against their sweaters. Someone coughed. I could smell burnt coffee from the lobby, mixing with the faint chlorine of the pool just outside. My palms were sweating, and I wasn't even the one on trial. My brother's fishing stunt had brought us here, but it was clear Linda was aiming bigger. She wasn't just policing a rod and reel anymore. She was rewriting the neighborhood's constitution. "Effective immediately," Linda continued, tapping the stack of papers in front of her. "Article 12 will be revised. All use of the lake, swimming, fishing, boating, even dock access, requires explicit board approval. Violators will be fined. Repeat offenders will be subject to lien placement." That last part landed like a grenade. Liens. The word spread down the rows in hushed whispers. People clutched their water bottles a little tighter, glanced at each other with wide eyes. A lien wasn't a fine you could brush off. It was a threat to your home. My hand shot up. "Excuse me, what gives you the authority to change the bylaws like that?" Linda's smile stretched thin. "The board has discretion to amend rules for the good of the community, and I assure you, the lake is being abused." "Abused?" I almost laughed. "By whom? A few kids with nets? My brother catching one sunfish? This isn't abuse, it's you overreaching." She slammed the gavel again. "Sit down, you're out of order." But I stayed standing, and I wasn't alone. A few heads nodded my way cautiously, like they'd been waiting for someone to say what they were all thinking. Still, no one else dared speak. Linda had cultivated that kind of fear, the quiet compliance of people who would rather grumble in private than challenge her in public. After the meeting, as neighbors trickled out, Linda cornered me by the exit. Her perfume hit first, sharp, floral, suffocating. "You should be careful," she whispered, too sweet to be sincere. "If you keep resisting, I'll have no choice but to escalate. Rules are rules." I didn't answer, but inside, something snapped. She wasn't running a neighborhood anymore. She was running a regime, and regimes only change when someone fights back. That night, my brother and I sat at my kitchen table, the bylaw packet spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. He stabbed a finger at one section. "Look at this. She doesn't even have the votes to amend bylaws. It requires 2/3 approval of homeowners, not just her little board." I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Good luck convincing everyone to stand up to her. They're terrified. He smirked. "Then maybe we need to bring in someone who isn't." The next morning, I called a lawyer. A real estate attorney recommended by a coworker, the kind who knew his way around HOA trickery. His office smelled like leather and old coffee, his tie crooked, his eyes sharp. He flipped through Linda's letters, her so-called amendments, and finally leaned back with a low whistle. "This is classic overreach," he said. "She's bluffing on authority she doesn't have, but if you really want to hit her where it hurts, we don't start with fishing. We start with the money. The money. HOAs live and die by budgets. Dues collected, expenses paid, reserves held. If she's been sloppy, or worse, dishonest, it'll be in the books. I left his office clutching a folder, adrenaline humming through me like electricity. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one ridiculous fine. This was about uncovering the rot beneath Linda's perfect clipboard-polished exterior. A week later, my brother and I sat in his car outside the clubhouse, the windows fogged from our breath. Inside, Linda was hosting another special session, smiling like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. She didn't know we had copies of financial reports, receipts that didn't add up, checks written to vendors that didn't seem to exist. "You realize," my brother muttered, "once we bring this up, there's no going back." "I know." I tightened my grip on the folder. She wanted zero tolerance. Fine. She's about to get it. We pushed open the doors, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, neighbors seated in their neat rows. Linda looked up, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw the papers in my hand. I smiled. "Madam President, I have some questions about the budget." The room stirred, chairs creaked, and for the first time, Linda didn't look so sure of herself. $4 million, the judge said, her voice slicing through the silence of the courtroom. "That is the amount this HOA will pay in damages." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My brother's jaw dropped. Even the opposing attorney blinked like he hadn't rehearsed this outcome. But the loudest sound wasn't shock. It was the silence from Linda Meadows. She sat at the defendant's table, hands white-knuckled around her pen, that trademark smirk finally gone. To understand how we got here, you'd have to start with the envelope she slipped into my mailbox 2 months earlier. A foreclosure notice. Thin, cruel, folded in thirds like a weapon. She'd marched it down the street herself, slid it in without ringing the doorbell, and probably strutted away humming the national anthem of HOA tyrants. She thought it was checkmate. She thought she'd scared me into surrender. Instead, she set the stage for her own undoing. By then, we had the lawyer, the files, the receipts that smelled of fraud. Thousands of dollars allocated to lake maintenance, even though the only thing ever maintained was Linda's manicure. Payments to consultants no one had ever seen. And that mysterious landscaping company whose checks all seemed to go to her cousin's P.O. box. My attorney's eyes had lit up like Christmas morning. "You don't fight her in the HOA meetings," he said. "You fight her in court." So we did. The trial was a spectacle. Neighbors packed the benches, some pretending they were there for jury duty practice, others openly sipping their lattes and whispering like it was reality TV. Linda walked in wearing a red blazer brighter than a stop sign, chin high, every step radiating arrogance. She gave me a glance, a flicker of disdain, as if I were a weed she'd been meaning to pull. Her opening argument was predictable. Rules are rules. Bylaws are binding. Property values depend on order. She even waved her clipboard like it belonged in the evidence locker. But when it was our turn, my lawyer dropped Exhibit A on the projector, bank statements showing thousands in consulting fees without board approval. Exhibit B was the bylaw amendment she'd rammed through without a homeowner vote. Exhibit C, my personal favorite, was a sworn affidavit from her own treasurer, who admitted he hadn't seen the books in over a year. The jury didn't need a smoking gun. Linda had built a bonfire all by herself. I'll never forget the moment the judge leaned forward, her glasses perched low. "Mrs. Meadows, can you provide any documentation that these expenditures were authorized by a vote of the homeowners?" Linda shuffled papers, stammered, tried to bluff with legal jargon, but everyone could see it. The crack in the armor, the unraveling thread. For the first time, she wasn't in control. By day 3, it stopped being about me and my brother's fishing rod. It became about every homeowner Linda had steamrolled, every bogus fine, every letter typed in aggressive Times New Roman. Witness after witness testified, the retiree charged for leaving a hose out, The single mom fined for a trampoline. The veteran threatened with a lien for building a wheelchair ramp. Each story layered onto the next until the courtroom air was thick with injustice. Then came the verdict: $4 million. Restitution, damages, penalties, and legal fees. A sum so massive you could feel the air get sucked out of the room. My brother grabbed my shoulder, whispering, "We won." I wanted to cheer, to laugh, to rub it in, but when I looked over at Linda, I froze. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. And that's when I realized something chilling. This wasn't over, because people like Linda don't just vanish when the gavel falls. They plot, they scheme, they wait for their chance to claw back what they think they've lost. After court, the neighbors gathered outside in clusters, buzzing like bees freed from a smoker. Some hugged me, some thanked me. A few even apologized for staying silent so long. But in the distance, across the parking lot, I saw her. Linda, standing by her car, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and though she said nothing, the message was clear. This war wasn't finished. Not by a long shot.